You know that feeling when you browse the internet these days, and
Yeah.
it feels different.
Oh, definitely.
Maybe a bit overwhelming, like you're wading through, I don't know, a lot of stuff to find what you're actually looking for.
It's a really common feeling, yeah. That early vision of the internet, this incredibly useful and open space, sometimes feels a little, well, diluted now.
Exactly, diluted. And some people are putting it even more starkly, talking about a dead internet or maybe a dark forest.
Yeah, those terms are floating around.
This space that was supposed to be all about connection and discovery can sometimes feel, well, pretty bleak. And a lot of people are pointing at generative AI as a big reason for this shift.
It's quite the irony, isn't it? I mean, this technology, it was supposed to make things easier for us, automate tasks, give us instant access to information.
But instead, it feels like we're just drowning in what one source calls slop. Just this massive, massive flood of automatically generated content.
Right. Finding the good stuff, the valuable information, it's getting harder amidst all that noise.
But here's where it gets really interesting. There's a kind of underground movement happening, a group of hackers who are, and I love this phrase, raging against the machine. They're actually building tools to fight back against these AI systems. It's a real David versus Goliath scenario kind of brewing.
Absolutely. And what's really fascinating about this counter movement is that it goes beyond just being, annoyed by the sheer volume of AI content. There are some really fundamental concerns at play here.
That's precisely what we're diving into today. We're going to unpack this emerging resistance, take a close look at one specific tactic they're using, and really try to understand what it all means for how we experience the internet going forward.
Okay, so to understand why these hackers are taking action, we probably first need to look at the problem they're reacting to.
Right.
One of the core issues raised in our sources is this idea of the internet as a panopticon. What's the underlying dynamic there? What does that mean?
Okay, let's unpack this. The central idea is that the internet, well, in its current form, it's largely designed for surveillance, right? And the monetization of user data. You and I, as the people actually using the internet, are essentially seen as the product. We're the product being farmed. Our clicks, our searches, our online behavior, it's all being collected and turned into a commodity. Think of it like being constantly watched, maybe not by one single entity, but by the very structure of the internet itself. Your every move is recorded, analyzed for profit.
Okay, that sets the stage pretty well for the arrival of generative AI. Our sources point to the public release of ChatGPT as a major turning point, a real watershed moment. Why was that event so significant?
Well, suddenly everyone could see the immense potential and, critically, the massive data requirements of these large language models, these LLMs.
Right, the hunger for data.
Yeah. ChatGPT was trained on an absolutely enormous scale. Millions of books, countless hours of YouTube transcripts, practically the entire visible web, Wikipedia, everything.
Yeah.
Its ability to generate text that sounded remarkably human-like was a real wake-up call for the entire tech industry. If you wanted to be a player in this AI space, you needed data, and you needed a lot of it.
And that realization led to a huge surge in data collection, didn't it? AI companies started scraping just vast amounts of online content.
Exactly.
And this is where the pushback really began, particularly from the people who actually create and own websites. What were their main grievances?
Well, you can imagine how frustrating it would be. Website owners, many of whom invest significant time, effort, maybe even money into creating their content.
Sure.
Suddenly saw it being hoovered up by these AI companies. And it wasn't just public domain stuff. It included their copyrighted work as well.
Ah, okay. That's a key point.
It felt like their creations were being taken without permission just to fuel these massive AI models. So what we're seeing here isn't just about blocking bots. It's a deliberate act of making the very fuel of these AI models toxic and expensive.
Right, highlighting that fundamental tension between sort of open web principles and this large-scale data aggregation.
Exactly.
So in response to this, we saw a fairly widespread adoption of something called robot.txt. Now, for our listener, this is essentially a simple text file that website owners can put on their site to communicate to automated bots, including web crawlers, which parts of their site they shouldn't access. It's been a voluntary standard for quite some time.
Exactly. It was like a digital "please do not enter" sign for these web crawlers. And initially, there was hope, maybe, that these big AI companies would respect this established protocol. But, as our sources indicate, The two major AI startups essentially began ignoring robot.txt almost immediately.
Right, ignoring the sign. And this is presented as the key moment, the spark that spurred these hackers into action. What were the main reasons they decided to intervene?
Well, their motivations are pretty strong, maybe even a bit rebellious, you could say.
Mm.
They want to show that generative AI isn't the groundbreaking intelligence it's being made out to be. They view it as all just smoke and mirrors.
It's members, yeah.
They want to pop the bubble around AI, believing it's overhyped and ultimately unsustainable in its current form.
Interesting.
A significant part of their strategy is also to financially disrupt these AI companies, pointing out that none of them are currently profitable.
Which is true, most aren't making money yet.
Right. And perhaps most interestingly, they aim to poison the AI models with bad data to degrade their performance and ultimately maybe spook investors.
Okay, so poisoning well, essentially. This brings us to the counterattack itself and the central focus of our discussion, the tactic of tar pitting. Our sources highlight an interview with someone named Aaron B. How did this interview spark this deep dive?
Well, this interview really brought attention to a proactive way of fighting back against these aggressive AI scrapers. Aaron B. wasn't just complaining, they were actively building tools.
Right, taking action.
Yeah, they took inspiration from an older cybersecurity technique called tar pitting, which is actually a really clever way of dealing with unwanted automated online traffic.
Okay, so for our listener who might not be familiar with cybersecurity terms, could you explain the basic idea of tar pitting in that context? What is it?
Yeah, think of it like this. If a piece of malicious software, like a worm, is trying to constantly scan your computer or send out spam, a tar pit doesn't just block it outright. Instead, it deliberately slows down the connection.
Okay.
It makes the whole process so time-consuming and resource-intensive for the attacker that it becomes ineffective and just not worth the effort, like digital quicksand.
Digital quicksand, I like that. The sources mention the original program that used this tactic, called Labra, created by Tom Lawn. What was his initial goal in developing that?
So Tom Lawn was dealing with a worm that was just relentlessly trying to access his IP address, just hitting it over and over.
Annoying.
Very. And instead of just trying to block it, which can be a constant back and forth game.
Yeah, whack-a-mole.
Exactly, digital whack-a-mole. He decided to make things much harder for it. As he put it, now you have a chance to make their life more difficult.
I like that attitude.
His aim was to slow the worm down so significantly that its spamming attempts would just become too inefficient to be worthwhile. He essentially wanted to make them have to work for it instead of rolling over and letting these do what they want.
Make them work for it. And Aaron D's tool, Nepenthees, takes this core idea and applies it specifically to AI scrapers. The name itself, after a carnivorous plant,
Yeah, the pitcher plant.
gives you a sense of its purpose. What are the two main goals of Nepenthees?
So just like that pitcher plant it's named after, Nepenthees aims to both slow down these AI scrapers, similar to Tom Lawn's lab, and to trap them indefinitely on a website.
Trap them, okay.
The idea is to create a digital sticky situation that wastes the AI company's time, their computing power, and ultimately contaminates their training data with nonsense.
Right. Let's get into the specifics of how Nepenthees actually creates this digital tar pit. What are the key steps involved? How does it work?
Okay, so the first thing you do is designate a specific area of your website, maybe a separate directory or folder. You give that space to Nepenthees.
Okay, a dedicated zone.
Then you create a link to this area from somewhere else on your site, maybe buried deep in the footer or somewhere less obvious to human visitors.
Hide the trapdoor.
Kind of, yeah. When an AI crawler happens to follow this link and enters the Nepenthees-controlled space, that's when things get, well, interesting. Or perhaps a bit mischievous. For every URL within this designated space, Nepenthees automatically generates a web page. It looks like a normal website page. Nothing immediately suspicious.
What's legit?
But, and this is the crucial part, every single link on these generated pages leads right back into the tar pit.
An endless loop.
It's an endless loop, yeah. A digital maze with no exit.
And the sources emphasize a deliberate slowdown in how quickly these pages load. They even make a comparison to the speed of a Roadrunner modem in 1997.
Yeah, painfully slow.
Yeah.
What's the strategy behind this sluggishness?
Okay, there are two primary reasons for this intentional slowdown. Firstly, it helps prevent the AI crawler from just overwhelming your server with a massive number of requests all at once. Keeps things manageable.
Okay, practical reason.
Secondly, and maybe more strategically, it burns up the AI company's resources. Their systems have to wait for a response from your server for each page it tries to access.
Oh, okay.
And while they have immense computing capabilities, those resources aren't unlimited. Every delayed response costs them time and processing power. It's like making them sit in a very, very slow-moving digital line.
Gotcha. Wasting their time and money. And the source mentions that Nepenthees sends just enough data to keep the crawler connected. It's almost like dangling bait to keep it engaged, isn't it?
Exactly. Just enough information to maintain the connection, preventing the crawler from simply giving up and maybe moving on to another site.
Keep them hooked.
Yeah, the whole system is designed to keep the AI engaged in this slow, resource-draining cycle of requesting and waiting, requesting and waiting.
Okay, so the consequence of this, as our sources explain, is quite significant for the AI crawler. What happens to its to-do list, its download queue, once it gets stuck in the tar pit?
Well, over time, the sheer number of pages it encounters within the tar pit starts to completely dominate the crawler's download queue. It just gets swamped.
Right.
Aaron B. suggests that these tar pit pages can eventually outnumber all the legitimate pages on your entire website.
Wow.
So the AI's resources become totally bogged down trying to process and store this never-ending stream of essentially useless data.
But Nepenthees doesn't stop at just trapping and slowing down these scrapers. It also incorporates something called Marov Babel. Could you explain what that is and how it contributes to this counteroffensive?
Yeah, that's right, because the people creating these tools aren't just bothered by the act of scraping itself, the downloading. They're concerned about their original work being turned into what they consider low-quality slop by AI models.
Right, the output.
So Aaron B. integrated a Marov babbler into Nepenthees. This is a very, very basic type of text generation algorithm. The goal here isn't to create coherent, meaningful text like ChatGPT.
No. Okay.
But rather text that has similar statistical properties to its training data, but ultimately just doesn't make any sense.
Like statistical gibberish.
Pretty much. Imagine teaching a parrot by only showing it a few short phrases. It might learn to repeat those phrases, but it has absolutely no idea what they mean or how to create new coherent sentences.
Like,
The Marov babbler is kind of like that parrot on a much larger scale, just statistically mimicking patterns it has seen.
okay. Our sources provide a helpful example, using the simple phrase, and this and that. How does the Marov babbler work in that specific scenario?
Okay, so if you train the Marov babbler just on that phrase, and this and that, it learns the probabilities of which words tend to follow each other.
The stats.
Yeah. In this very simple example, it might learn that and is followed by this 50% of the time, and by that 50% of the time.
Okay.
It might also learn that this is always followed by and that always ends the sentence. So if you then give the babbler the word this, it's very likely to just spit out something like this and that and this and that.
Just repeating the pattern.
Exactly, just statistically probable sequences of words without any real understanding or meaning behind them.
Got it. And the key takeaway is what happens when you feed this kind of babbler large amounts of real-world text and then try to use it to answer questions like you would with ChatGPT.
Right. Instead of getting a helpful or informative response, you just get back a jumbled mess of statistically plausible but ultimately nonsensical sentences.
Just word salad.
Word salad, exactly. It's like a parrot just randomly squawking words it's heard without any comprehension. And this this Marov babble, is precisely what Nepenthees feeds to any AI crawler that ignores the robot.txt directives.
So it's not just trapping them, it's feeding them garbage.
Yeah.
It's interesting to note Aaron B.'s perspective on adding the Markov generator, though. It wasn't necessarily intended as this, sophisticated data poisoning technique right from the outset.
No, apparently not. According to Aaron, adding the Markov generator was almost a whim for the fun of it.
Really? Just for kicks?
Kind of seems like it. While they're not entirely sure just how effective it will be as a way to corrupt AI training data, the attitude seems to be, well, who cares? Let's go. Why not give it a shot?
Huh. There's definitely an element of digital mischief and maybe just making a statement involved there.
For sure. Which brings us to the idea of a fight club mentality that our sources touch upon. There's a sense of digital rebellion, almost anarchy, behind these actions. What's the underlying argument for taking such a seemingly drastic approach?
Well, the argument being made is that something significant, something drastic maybe, needs to happen to get the attention of these massive tech companies.
Right.
And to challenge what they see as an unsustainable bubble in the AI space. They believe that the current practice of scraping vast amounts of data without consent to train these models is just fundamentally wrong and needs to be disrupted in a meaningful way.
Okay. And Aaron B. offers a particularly critical view of current AI technology, describing it as spicy autocomplete rather than true artificial intelligence. Could you elaborate on that perspective for us?
Yeah, that's a great phrase, spicy autocomplete. The core of this argument is that current large language models, LLMs, are essentially just very advanced systems for predicting the next word in a sequence.
Just guessing the next word.
That's the idea. They lack genuine understanding, reasoning, or consciousness. This limitation leads to the well-documented issue of hallucinations, where the AI confidently just makes stuff up, presents incorrect information as fact.
Yeah, we've all seen examples of that.
And our sources highlight how humans, we have this natural tendency to attribute intelligence to systems that show a certain level of complexity.
We see patterns, yeah.
And they argue that LLMs are kind of designed to exploit this tendency, even though they're not actually thinking in the way humans do. The core insight here is that current AI might be impressive in its mimicry, but it fundamentally lacks understanding, which raises big questions about the true value and potential dangers of relying solely on this statistically generated content.
And the rhetorical question posed in the source material is quite thought-provoking. Do you think a Maroff babbler will ever be sentient?
Right.
Why would an LLM ever reach general AI when a Maroff model cannot? It's all just smoking mirrors. What's the core of that argument?
The underlying point is, if a very simple statistical model, like a Maroff babbler, which clearly lacks any real understanding of the world, will never become sentient or achieve true intelligence, then why would a more complex statistical model, like an LLM, which basically operates on the same core principle of predicting the most likely next word, why would it ever achieve true general artificial intelligence?
It's a fundamental challenge to the idea of emergent consciousness from statistics alone.
Exactly. It's a way of demystifying the current hype and suggesting that the underlying technology might not be as revolutionary or as close to real AI as some believe.
Okay. Our sources also mentioned that Nepenthees isn't the only tool of its kind, citing something called iocane as another example. What does the existence of these other tools suggest about the broader sentiment?
Well, the fact that there are multiple similar tools emerging really indicates that this isn't just an isolated effort by one individual hacker.
It's not just Aaron B.
No. There's a growing sense of concern and a desire for action within a segment of the internet community regarding how AI is being developed and deployed. People are actively looking for ways to push back.
Of course, our sources also acknowledge the likely response from the major AI players. What are some of the potential limitations of these tar-pinning strategies in the long run? Are they going to work forever?
Probably not forever. It's probably realistic to assume that these multi-billion-dollar AI companies will eventually adapt their crawling techniques.
Yeah, the resources.
They have huge resources. They'll likely develop more sophisticated methods for detecting and avoiding these digital tar pits, identifying these patterns and navigating around them.
So while these tools might offer some level of disruption in the short term, they're unlikely to be a permanent or, foolproof solution.
Right. However, the primary motivation behind Aaron B's work seems to be less about achieving some kind of total victory in full-scale digital warfare.
Right, not about winning the war.
And more about something else. What's the underlying feeling driving this?
Exactly. For Aaron B., it seems to be more of a powerful expression of just rage at what the internet has turned into.
Just pure frustration.
Yeah. It's a way of lashing out, maybe regardless of effectiveness, at a system they feel is unfairly exploiting creators and users. It's almost a form of digital protest, a way of saying, we're not going to just stand by and watch this happen.
And despite the potential for AI companies to adapt, Aaron intends to continue maintaining Nepenthees.
Sticking with it. Our sources give an estimated number of Nepenthees instances currently in the wild. What does that tell us about the current scale of this counter-movement?
Yeah, the estimate is somewhere between 50 and 250 instances.
Okay, and not huge numbers yet.
No. It suggests that while there's definitely some activity happening, it's still a relatively small-scale effort at this point. However, the very fact that these tools exist and are being actively deployed indicates a significant undercurrent of dissatisfaction and a willingness to take action.
Right. And the source material includes some pretty strong warnings associated with using Nepenthees. What's the tone of these warnings, and what are the key things users should be aware of?
Oh yeah, the warnings are very direct. They don't pull any punches. The stated goal of Nepenthees is quite aggressive,
Hmm.
to accelerate AI model collapse and see them burn.
Wow, okay, see them burn.
Yeah. It explicitly advises against deploying the tool if you're not completely comfortable with its potential consequences. This really highlights the somewhat radical and disruptive nature of these tools. It's not for the faint of heart.
Definitely not. Finally, our sources connect these actions to broader anxieties about the dead internet theory, the idea of shittification of online content.
Yeah, shittification, AI slop, even brain rot.
How does it frame tools like Nepenthees within this larger context of concerns?
It frames these tools as a direct response to a growing feeling that the internet is becoming increasingly polluted with low-quality, automatically generated content,
Right.
making it much harder to find genuine human expression and valuable, reliable information. There's a parallel drawn to the early days of social media, which was also seen by some as a grand social experiment being performed on us without our consent.
Interesting parallel.
The underlying desire is to push back against this perceived erosion of the internet's value and integrity. This feeling of the internet just becoming less valuable, filled with this low-quality stuff, that shittification idea is a key driver behind this resistance.
And the concluding thought in our sources is quite powerful. We can fight back even if we don't succeed. Be indigestible. Grow spikes. What's the core message there?
It's really a call to action, isn't it? Even if the odds seem heavily stacked against individuals, it's about resisting the unchecked advancement of AI data scraping and the potential negative impacts it could have on the internet as we know it.
Right.
The idea of being indigestible and growing spikes suggests making it more difficult, more costly for AI systems to simply consume and repurpose our content without our consent.
Don't make it easy for them.
Exactly. It's about trying to assert some level of control over our digital lives and the information ecosystem we all rely on.
So as we conclude this deep dive, we've explored these growing concerns surrounding generative AI and the maybe unexpected emergence of resistance through tools like Nepenthees.
Exactly. We've seen how a perceived problem, this relentless scraping of online data, has sparked a counter-movement, a movement driven by a desire to disrupt the current trajectory and perhaps even, poison the data that fuels these AI models.
Yeah, and this raises some really important questions for you, our listener, to consider. What does it mean for the future of information and creativity if these digital tar pits become more widespread? How might AI companies respond and adapt to these tactics?
Right. Is this a necessary act of digital self-defense in a rapidly evolving online world? Or could it be viewed as a form of digital vandalism with unforeseen consequences?
It really makes you think about your own place in all of this. How do you want to see the internet evolve? How do you choose to consume and interact with online information?
Yeah, these are increasingly critical questions as we navigate this new landscape, this world shaped by generative AI and the reactions, the pushback it's provoking.